Imagine, if you will, a December night. The air is crisp, families are gathering, and gifts are being exchanged. The streets are lit with candles, and the sound of caroling fills the air. It feels familiar. It feels like Christmas. But look closer. Those aren't carols. They are drunken shouts of "I-O Saturnalia." That isn't a Christmas ham on the table. It's a sacrificial offering from the temple. And the person serving the wine isn't a waiter. It is a wealthy senator pouring a drink for his own slave who sits at the head of the table, wearing his master's clothes. This is not the silent night of Bethlehem. This is Rome, roughly 2,000 years ago. This is Saturnalia, the wildest, most chaotic, and most beloved festival of the ancient world. And whether you realize it or not, the ghosts of this drunken week still haunt our living rooms every December 25th. Welcome to the hidden history of the season. To understand Saturnalia, we have to understand the entity at its center. The god Saturn. In Roman mythology, Saturn was not always the grim, scythe-wielding figure associated with time and death. Long before the rise of the great Roman Empire, it was believed that Saturn ruled over the earth during a golden age. The golden age was a mythical era of perfect peace and abundance. It was a time before laws, before courts, before war, and most importantly, before slavery. The earth gave up its crops without farming, and all men were equal. When Saturn was eventually overthrown by his son Jupiter, that age ended. The hard reality of iron and toil took over. But the Romans, for all their discipline and military rigidity, missed that dream of paradise. And so they carved out a loophole in their calendar, a specific time when time itself would roll back. Originally, Saturnalia was a one-day feast held on December 17th. But the people loved it so much that it kept expanding. By the late Republic, it had grown to a week-long festival, ending around December 23rd. It was, as the poet Catullus famously called it, the best of days. During this week, the courts were closed. Schools were shut down. It was illegal to declare war. It was even discouraged to punish criminals. The entire machinery of the Roman state, usually so cold and efficient, ground to a halt. The bronze statue of Saturn in the Roman Forum, which had its feet bound with woolen bonds throughout the year, symbolizing that the god was contained, was untied. Saturn was loose. Chaos was legal. The most famous and perhaps most shocking aspect of Saturnalia for the Romans was the social inversion. Rome was a slave society. The hierarchy was strict and brutal. But during Saturnalia, the world turned upside down. If you walked into a wealthy Roman home during this week, you would witness a scene that would seem impossible any other time of year. The masters formally gave up their authority. They would dress in the casual, colorful dining clothes usually reserved for the lower classes, leaving their heavy white togas in the closet. Meanwhile, the slaves were permitted to wear the pileus, a felt cap that was the symbol of a freed man. Inside the banquet hall, the slaves sat at the table, or reclined, as was the Roman custom. They ate the best food and drank the best wine. The masters, they played the role of the servants. They brought the dishes. They poured the drinks. Now historians debate how far this really went. Was it a genuine moment of equality? Probably not. It was likely a safety valve. By letting the pressure off the oppressed class for a few days, allowing them to mock their masters and feel human, the Roman elite hoped to prevent actual rebellions during the rest of the year. It was a controlled chaos. But for the slaves, it was the one week of the year where they could look a senator in the eye and laugh. This atmosphere of anything goes extended out into the streets. Gambling with dice was strictly forbidden in Rome for most of the year, seen as a vice that destroyed families. But during Saturnalia, the dice rattled in every tavern and on every street corner. Even the emperors played. Augustus Caesar famously wrote letters boasting about how much money he had lost gambling during the holiday. And presiding over all this madness was a figure known as the Saturnalicious Princeps, the leader of Saturnalia, or the mock king. In many households, lots were drawn to select this king. Often, a lowly member of the household or a child would be chosen. For the duration of the party, this mock king had total authority. But his commands were designed to be ridiculous. He might order a philosopher to dance naked, a shy person to sing a loud song, or a dignified matron to insult her husband. Everyone had to obey the king of misrule. This tradition of the Lord of Misrule survived for centuries, carrying on into the medieval Christmas traditions of Europe, a direct genetic line from the Roman dice tables to the feasts of fools in the Middle Ages. However, there is a darker shadow that hangs over the history of the mock king. In the early 20th century, some anthropologists suggested that in the very earliest, most primitive versions of the festival, the mock king wasn't just embarrassed at the end of the festival, he was sacrificed. The theory was that he represented the god Saturn himself, who gave his life for the prosperity of the people. While most modern historians reject the idea that human sacrifice was a standard part of the classical Roman Saturnalia, the festival did have a connection to death. The gladiatorial games, where men fought and died for entertainment, were originally funeral offerings. During December, munera, or funeral games, were often held. So while the slaves were feasting, blood was indeed flowing in the arena. The proximity of joy and death was something the Romans understood well. The sun was dying, the year was ending. Death was the fertilizer for new life. As the festival wound down, we see the traditions that look the most familiar to us today. The final days of the season included a festival within a festival called the Sigillaria. This was the day of gift giving. The streets of Rome would be filled with stalls selling small gifts. The most common gifts were wax tapers, candles, and small terracotta figurines, also called sigillaria. The candles were significant. Remember, this festival took place around the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. The world was dark. Giving a candle was a form of sympathetic magic, a way to help the sunlight return. It was a promise that the light would conquer the darkness. The little figurines were given to children, much like modern toys. But even these innocent dolls had a spooky origin. Some Roman writers, like Macrobius, suggested that in the dark, legendary past, heads were offered to the gods in exchange for prosperity. The terracotta dolls were a substitute, a head for a head. A toy given to a child was a symbolic sacrifice that had been sanitized over centuries. So we have a midwinter festival involving candles, gift-giving, feasting, and a suspension of normal work rules. It sounds perfect, but how did this pagan roar transform into the Christian Mass of Christ? For the first 3 centuries of Christianity, the birth of Jesus wasn't a major festival. In fact, no one really knew when he was born. The Bible doesn't specify a date, and clues in the text, like shepherds watching their flocks by night, suggest spring, not winter. Early church leaders were more focused on Easter and the resurrection. But as Christianity moved from a persecuted cult to the official religion of the empire, it faced a problem. The people loved Saturnalia. They loved the parties, they loved the gambling, and they loved the lights. You couldn't just tell a Roman populace to give up the best of days and sit quietly in the dark. If you can't beat them, join them. In the 4th century, specifically around the year 336 AD during the reign of Constantine, we see the first recorded celebration of Christmas on December 25th. Why this date? It wasn't just to overwrite Saturnalia, which ended on the 23rd. It was to co-opt an even more specific festival that happened on the 25th, the birthday of the unconquered sun, or Sol Invictus. The cult of Sol Invictus was a major rival to Christianity. It celebrated the moment the sun began to regain its strength after the solstice. By placing the birth of Jesus, the light of the world, on the birthday of the sun god, the church performed a brilliant marketing maneuver. They allowed the people to keep their winter celebrations, but changed the object of their worship. The transition wasn't smooth. For centuries, church leaders complained that their parishioners were still partying like pagans. They were dancing in the streets, getting drunk and wearing masks. The sermons of the time are full of bishops scolding their flocks for bringing the madness of Saturnalia into the sanctity of the Nativity. But the habit stuck. The greenery used to decorate Roman houses became our holly and ivy. The Cere candles became our Christmas lights. The sigillaria became the toys in Santa's sack. And the spirit of charity, where the rich fed the poor during the Roman banquets, morphed into the goodwill to all men of the Victorian era. Even the silence of the modern Christmas night is a relatively new invention. For most of history, Christmas was loud. It was rowdy. It was a time of public drinking and feasting, much closer to the spirit of the Roman tavern than the quiet of a church. It wasn't until the 19th century that Christmas was domesticated into a private, family-centered holiday. So as we look back at Saturnalia, we aren't just looking at dusty history. We are looking at the DNA of our own culture. We are seeing the human need to rage against the dying of the light. When the winter is cold and the nights are long, humans have always felt the need to gather together, to light fires, to share food, and to pretend, even for just a few days, that the hierarchy of the world has melted away and that all of us, master and slave, rich and poor, are equal under the gaze of time. The Temple of Saturn lies in ruins today in the Roman Forum. Just a few columns remain standing against the sky. The shouts of Io Saturnalia have faded into the wind. But the next time you raise a glass at a holiday party, or watch a child unwrap a toy, or see a house lit up against the dark December sky, remember, you are keeping the fire of Saturn burning. The gods may change, but the party never really ends. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the drunken history of the holidays, be sure to like and subscribe for more hidden history.